And it is day 109 of the second Trump administration. And earlier today, UK officials joined President Trump and his team to announce that some kind of trade deal between our two countries is close. And there is one phrase that President Trump used over and over and over again. Watch this.
I think you'll get a pretty good understanding of how big it is. It's a very large deal, very big deal. It's a very big deal right now. This is a bigger deal. This is a much bigger, better, stronger deal for both of us than we ever even contemplated before. It's a big deal. It's very conclusive, and it's a great deal, and it's a very big deal, actually.
Big deal. Did you catch that? He said it's a big deal. So why don't we take a look at actually how big a deal it actually is? JP Morgan said it would likely have a limited impact, especially since Trump's 10% baseline tariff on the UK is still in place. And the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, talked about that, too. Watch this.
We still have our 10% tariff on, which will produce $6 billion of revenue for the United States. So we feel really good about the deal. You've heard the Prime Minister. He feels really good about the deal, right? And we started at 10% and we ended at 10%. And the market for America is better. And this is a perfect example of why Donald Trump produced Liberation Day.
There's a lot to unpack here. First, if you are wondering why Fed Chair Jerome Powell did not cut rates yesterday, I want you to look at that 10% tariff that remains on the UK. That is triple what it used to be. And this is the UK, our closest ally, where we do not have a trade deficit. Think about all those other countries where we actually do have them. They're going to likely be stuck with higher tariffs. And what does that mean? Inflation ahead. And Jay Powell and pretty much all of Wall Street and the business community, they know this. So let's get to the actual deal part of the big deal. There was no final deal announced today, and President Trump eventually admitted that.
The final details are being written up in the coming weeks. We'll have it all very conclusive, but the actual deal is a very conclusive one.
We'll see. As I told you before, deals on average take 18 months. So to summarize, here's the president's agriculture secretary on Fox Business just before that Oval Office showcase.
Again, more details coming. It is an agreement in concept. There's a lot of details to be worked out.
It is a concept of a deal. Does that sound familiar? Well, according to my sources, this thing is pure theater. And the sources I am talking about are Wall Street investors, many of whom voted for Trump, many of whom are willing to stand up and give him a standing ovation and pat him on the back if it means we can get out of this trade war and get back to the tax cuts and deregulation they want. But even those guys looked at today and said it was just a show. A country we did not have a deficit with, a prime minister who has gone out of his way to charm Donald Trump, and a dressed-up framework to distract us from real challenges ahead, like fewer cargo ships in our biggest ports. So this big deal announcement was carefully choreographed to give markets hope. And guess what? For the day, it worked. Markets shot up. But the real reason they went up may have more to do with the president changing his tune on China in the last 24 hours. Yesterday, the president said no reducing tariffs on China, no matter what. Well, today, he said we know the tariff is coming down. This is a clear shift and a softening. Add to that his other remarks today, telling folks to buy stocks and the market is cheap. Well, the last time he said that, it was just before he paused tariffs on all other countries back on April 9th. And what did markets do? They soared then and they soared today. But remember, markets search for any reason to get optimistic, but that does not change the facts on the real street. Ford is raising prices, industries are begging for exemptions, and stores are preparing for supply chain paralysis, meaning we, the United States consumer and our businesses, we pay the tariffs. That is the reality. And if you want to put lipstick on that pig, you better hope it's produced in the USA. With that, let's bring in our leadoff panel tonight. Peter Baker is here, chief White House correspondent for The New York Times. Charlie Sykes, MSNBC columnist and political analyst. David Gura, correspondent for Bloomberg and host of the Big Take podcast. And former Wall Street banker turned journalist Bill Cohen, founding partner at Puck News. Bill, what's your take on this announcement? Not the China, the UK.
This is all performative to me. I feel like this is one big act. Let me light on fire 100 houses in the village, and let me take a fire hose and put one out at a time and claim like I'm this great hero who just put out this fire. Meanwhile, the other 99 houses burn away, and we'll see if we can get to them in time so that I can once again proclaim myself to be a hero. I don't understand this. It makes no economic sense. It's not good for the American public. I'm at an absolute loss, and you've got the sycophants crowding around him in the Oval Office, telling him how wonderful he is, and you've got everybody else in the world telling him how crazy all this is, and yet it continues.
We're having more and more business people say how terrible this is. I mean, David Gura, for the White House to frame this like this superstar deal is the first of many, first of all, we don't even know the deal details. And I said this earlier. This is like saying tonight was my opening night at the hottest New York City restaurant that I just opened. It's going to blow this town apart. When you actually open the doors, the only people eating there are my friends and family. What is your take on what we saw today?
Yes, it was all theater as I saw it, down to the speakerphone that was on the desk with Keir Starmer, the prime minister, on the other line, and President Trump there with a binder with a script in sheet protectors in front of him, kind of going through this. But we should say this is a deal that, rather a concept of a plan, a framework for a deal that has been in the works here for many years. I mean, the U.S. and the U.K. have been trying to come together on a trade agreement for many years now. Lo, we have this kind of half-finished agreement. But what's really in it, we don't know. And I noticed over the course of the days, we heard from some of the folks who were right around him there at the desk, how they see this as a template for future deals. Well, that doesn't engender much optimism in me, and I imagine not in investors as well, given how thin this is and how inchoate it is, how little we know about how this is going to actually operate. And, this is the prelude to what is the real negotiation that's going to take place over the course of this week. And not that my expectations for anything tangible coming out of it are high, but it's this U.S.-China stalemate that we're in. And you're right to point out, over the course of the comments that followed the president's remarks about the U.S. and the U.K., there is some awareness now, it seems, among the president and his team that these tariffs that have been put in place for China are just unsustainable. But fundamentally here, we have decisions that are being made and driven by personality and not economics, nothing else. And you heard that from Keir Starmer today. You heard that from the Q&A that followed when somebody asked about Mattel making toys overseas and the president saying that he would put a 100% tariff on toys as a result of this happening. There is just nothing fundamental underpinning any of the decisions that are being made here today. And that was kind of shown in stark relief in the Oval Office during this bit of theater this morning.
But, Peter, we know that the president is all about winning the media cycle, right? And this week, the Milken Conference is going on, right? Some of the biggest investors, even some of the biggest people in politics. And we're seeing speaker after speaker. And just 4 days after Warren Buffett went off on tariffs, we're seeing huge people in the business world speak ill of this trade war. And the president needed to turn the news story. And did he turn it in a way that was successful enough for him today?
Well, look, I think you're right. A lot of people wanted to see a sign of de-escalation. And this, on some level, looks like it's that. It looks like he wants to make deals. It's not much of a deal, as you've rightly said. The Trump administration said today that this would open opportunities for $5 billion worth of exports. $5 billion is a pittance of the $2 trillion in exports we currently have each year. So there was 0.25% of our current exports. This isn't going to move the dial, therefore, on very much. And it's not going to raise a lot of revenue either. You heard Howard Lutnick say, oh, my gosh, it's going to give us $6 billion in tariffs. Well, we have an annual spending budget of around $6 trillion in the federal government. In other words, this is 0.1% of the revenue that the government takes in. This is also not going to move the dial. But it may encourage people to think that the president doesn't really want to have an all-out trade war, that he really does want to be able to, find some things he can call deals, declare a victory, and call it off, and therefore people can get back to some sort of a semblance of a stable investment environment. But, they talked about 90 deals in 90 days. We're about a third of the way through that. We've got one deal, even if you can call it that. The other 89 are still to go, and they're a whole lot harder.
Yes, and this deal now has U.S. automakers up in arms because for them, they think it's better for British automakers. Charlie, Donald Trump's poll numbers have been going down on the economy, and the economy was his winning issue. Do you think today is going to help turn that around and help him?
No, not long term, because it doesn't solve any of these problems. But, to the point of turning the dial, Donald Trump turns the dial on each news cycle, right? It is all performative. And as the executive producer of the Trump Economics Show, he was able to get the markets to respond. But underlying this continues to be the economy by whim. In fact, as I was watching your lead-in and listening to the president, talking about what a big deal it was, it sounded like a documentary for the Fire Festival. This is what he does. He's a salesman. He's a hype master. At some point, he's going to have to come to a solution here, and until that happens, I don't think the markets and the consumers are going to settle down. But right now, we're in the performative phase of all of this, where Donald Trump is going to claim some victory, claim a deal, even when it's the concept of a framework of a deal in progress. That's what he does. And I think he probably thinks that he can bumble his way through one news cycle after another by proclaiming this sort of thing. But, to the larger point, look, if this country does plunge into a recession or something close to a recession, it's hard to see how he doesn't pay a significant price for that.